My name is Trine Eklund, Oslo, Norway, and it's the 31st of January today, 2013. I'm going to tell you a little about the Nordic women's peace marches from the 80s. You know that in late 1979, NATO told us that they were going to modernize the nuclear weapons. We had already had the nuclear weapons from 1945 when they were dropped over Nagasaki or Hiroshima, and we had also had they tried to solve nuclear weapons up in or put up nuclear weapons up in Russia, quite close to the Norwegian border at the Novosemiya, and that was in 1962. We had also had demonstrations around the uranium bomb also in the 60s. So we were well acquainted with the nuclear bombs and what that could do to the world, to the globe, how they could blow up the whole globe. So we, especially women, were afraid. Women were afraid for what kind of pollution. Could we drink the milk from the breast to feed the children? What would happen with the food? What would happen with the environment? What would happen with people? We had seen terrible photos from Hiroshima, and we had seen it very, very often actually, because it was shown again and again. We had the Cold War during this period, and the American propaganda and the Russian propaganda. And then there were, especially women, as I told you, that were afraid and saw that we had to do something. And at the university we had a professor, later professor. Her name was Eva Nordland. And she went out and said, we have to do something. And she and two very scared young mothers, they sat around the kitchen table and said, what can we do? And they found out that they had simply to march through Europe. And they then found out that it couldn't only be Norwegian women, there had to be Scandinavian women. So they called upon their friends in Sweden, Denmark, Iceland, Finland, Greenland as well, and Iceland as well, yes, and said, shall we try to do something? Shall we try to walk through Europe? Shall we try to walk, for instance, from Copenhagen to Paris, to try to show people what this modernization of nuclear bomb is going to do with us? And they decided that they wanted to have two logos. One should be no to nuclear weapons in East and West. And the other one was, let us use the military spendings to food and development. That was the only two, what do you call it, parole, that we should have. Nothing about NATO, nothing. But we were told by press and politicians that it was a march against NATO. And that was a lie. It was not, it was definitely not a march against NATO or anything. It was just to prevent nuclear weapons to be modernized. So they started from Copenhagen, and that was summer 1981. Of course, they had to use 1 year for organizing. So this was summer 1981, 6 weeks. We had started from Copenhagen, and one of our female politicians from Parliament, she opened the march, and she was so criticized afterwards for doing that. Of course, she couldn't, as a parliamentarian, she couldn't support this march. So she was very much criticized for what she did, but she did it. And they started out, not so many people, and the press followed, and the press was of course negative because they looked around and looked on paroles and things that happened in the surroundings. They didn't have focus on the march. But they walked through Denmark down to Germany, and then people started coming together and together with us. And we walked and we walked, and we were sleeping in tents. We had sleeping bags, of course, with us. And a lot of things happened, and there was a lot of discussions, a lot of quarrelings or what and how. But people followed us. They came with food, they came with water. It was summer. Some days were extremely hot. And then I walked through Germany, and then through Belgium, Netherlands, towards France. And on all the distances, people came, walked with us for hours, worked with us for days, 1 day, 3 days. Some walked, a small group walked the whole march, but most people walked maybe for some days. And then I went back again. But people joined us all the time and stood along the streets and offered us to come home to them to go for toilet, to have a glass of water, to have something to eat. And then we started walking again, you know. Because a lot of people, we didn't march, we just walked on, and people were gathering together, talking together. It was a fantastic period. Then coming to Paris, then France stopped us. They didn't want us to go walk into Paris. It was extremely hot, and firemen came with water and let us have a shower, actually. So we Scandinavian blonde girls and women, they stayed naked with the firemen watering them, and of course it was very pleasant because it was so hot they couldn't walk any longer, so they really needed this shower from the firemen. But and that happened when there were discussions with the French politicians that the march could go into Paris, because they stopped it for several days. But they managed. At last we were allowed to walk into Paris, but not as we had thought, with maybe a little more glamorous, but at least we reached Paris. So that was the march in 81, walking from Copenhagen to Paris during 6 weeks. Then, of course, the media was rather negative, and there were politicians were astonished how we could do this. And then they said, well, you have to walk to east. It's not the Western nuclear weapons. They are not dangerous. It's not there. You have to go to Russia. You have to go to USSR to show the East European Union that their nuclear weapons, they are the dangerous one. They are the one that will use them next time. But we said, well, they are both West and East, so if we are going to go to East, then we also have to go to West. That means if you want us to go to Russia, we also have to go to America. And so we did. In 82, during the winter, there were very hard discussions with the Russian politicians, because they wanted us to, they wanted to do that, we should do the march in their way. And we said, of course, it's impossible. We have to be in some neutral between East and West, and we have to do it in our way. I'm sorry, there was a small delegation of Scandinavian women that quite often went over to Russia to discuss with them and to plan and to organize. And we had especially one Russian man that had been here in Norway in the diplomacy here, and that talked for us as well. He understood our way of thinking, so he could also explain for the Russians how we were thinking, and that if the march should go in Russia, it had to be in our way. And they said yes. And they organized the march for us. So then we had to be a delegation because they were going to put up a train for us. Because they were much too far to walk, of course. Long distances. I mean, Russia is extremely long. And this march was called then Stockholm, Moscow, Minsk. It means that it started in Stockholm. We had then, I was asked by my peace organization, Norwegian Peace Association, if I wanted to be a delegate from the delegation, because there were delegations then. We had 75 women from each country. We were five countries, and 75 women from each country, because of the train, because of the possibility to organize this. So we started from Stockholm, and we had the press, of course, and we wanted female journalists, and they sent men journalists from all the newspapers. And we understood very soon that we were definitely not on the same march. They saw things that we didn't see or didn't think of, but the journalists, they were nearly only negative. And we thought of what people were thinking when they read the newspapers at home. So negative, because for us it wasn't negative, it was positive. We enjoyed very much what we were experiencing. We then were some days in Stockholm, and then we went over to Helsinki, where we met the rest of the group. And from there we went into the first town. I don't remember now what it was called, but there we went and we trained, and there we met the Russian train, and we met Russians just on the border between Finland and Russia. We woke up in the morning after night train from Helsinki to Russia, and we were met by lot of flowers, red carpet, music, people. It was just fantastic. And we were dancing together and really enjoying some hours together. Then we went into this beautiful Russian train. First of all, it was green. It was written Mir, M-R-R, that means peace, on all the wagons with huge letters. And there were 4 beds in each cabin, very comfortable ones, very nice. And we had a babucha that served tea, and the toilets were quite clean, and it was so. We went on with this, and the next stop there again we were met by flowers and red carpets and music and people. And we in our dowry, we had never experienced anything like that. We were looked upon as VIP persons, and none of us, we were quite ordinary, we with our blue jeans and our jumpers, but they met us with so much love and friendship, and they were crying because we came with peace. They said when we came to Leningrad and Moscow, they embraced us and said, "You are coming with peace." No, never happened before. West have always come with war when they visit us, and you are coming with peace. So all the kisses and the embracements, that was really something. And we of course we came to big towns, but we also stopped at small towns. We had the gatherings with people, we had gatherings with politicians and with labor organizations. They invited us. We were lodged in hotels. Not expensive hotels, but good hotels. At least we had a bed to sleep in. The food we were lacking actually something to drink, because they only served strong tea and a very kind of strong sweet beer. We didn't have enough to drink, and the food was not always what we were used to, but it didn't matter. It didn't matter, and it was much too many cakes, actually, sweets. But that didn't matter. We were always being served. We were served cakes and tea, and that is not the food we needed. But it doesn't matter. Very little fruit and vegetables. So every day something happened. Every day we had meetings. Every day we had gathering with people. We were dancing, and we had the first ones when we went into big towns. We were dressed in pink, long. You can see it here, and we had a beautiful banner or logo that. Like this. If you can see how we were dressed, it was only the 10 or 15 first persons. And they, of course, let us walk in the streets, in the main streets. They had closed the streets. Russians can do that. So they closed the streets, and we could walk in the middle of the streets and meet people. And traffic was stopped when we came with buses or cars or whatever it was. Traffic was stopped, and of course we didn't like that. It was a lot of these things that we were looked upon as VIP persons that we didn't like at all, but we couldn't do anything about it because that was organized from Russia. And we are quite sure, and we was also told by our organizers that the politicians looked at us or listened to us and saw us. And you know, Mikhail Gorbachev, he was one of those politicians. He became later the president of the Russian Union or the East European Union. So, and what we also experienced as a consequence of this in 1886, I think it was, the spring in 86, when Mikhail Gorbachev had won the election, he invited, first of all, the world's women to an international women's conference in Moscow. That was fantastic because so many of us were there. We were invited to come, and it was just marvelous. And then he invited different sections, for instance, doctors or physicians against nuclear weapons, and the unions, international unions, and other sections of official life, international organizations. I think he organized that spring 6 peace conferences in Moscow, and we think maybe it was a little result of what we had done. So, but we don't know. Of course, we have never been able to confirm that. So, okay, we had told that if we should go in East, or that was the Russian Union, we also had to go to West, and that means that they had to organize a third march that walked. Then the march was called Oslo, New York, Washington. So we went over. It was quite a lot to organize, and while in Russia it was more official march. It was the official that had organized, so they had money and they had everything for organizing. In America it was one woman that took care of the organization, and she was a member of a church community, worked at the UN Plaza in New York. So she used different church communities to organize this march for us. No official, of course, no money, absolutely no money. And but she did a wonderful work. When we came to New York, we were placed into a storeroom that once had been a storeroom in a Buddhist house, quite close to the United Nations. I think it was one toilet for 100 people or something. And we had, of course, again, sleeping bags. We didn't bring sleeping bags to Russia, but of course we did that when we went to America. We had sleeping bags. We could have one suitcase or rucksack or something like that, each of us. It wasn't much room, so we couldn't have much luggage. And but at least a sleeping bag we had. And towels, of course, and because we were never coming to any hotel or lodge where we were supported with towels, for instance, or sheets in America. But we used the church facilities, and we were lodged into church communities, and shall we say, the menighet, the people belonging to the church, they supported us with food, so we had very, very nice evenings. Everywhere where we walked, we had very nice evenings with the people belonging to the church community. So we had a very good time with these people, but there were nothing official. And when we walked on the streets, because after having visited United Nations and UN Plaza and the organizations working in UN Plaza and all these rather civil organizations, peace organizations in New York, I think we stayed there for 3-4 days. Then we started walking, and of course they didn't clear the streets, so we had to walk on the pavements with these huge, again with this time we were dressed in, not in pink, but in light blue dresses. But we also had, not of course these banners written in Russian, but we had English written banners. And we had also some beautiful flags. I don't think you see it here, but we had some beautiful, very beautiful flags also with us. And with all this equipment, it was rather difficult to walk on the pavement. And then there were these huge, rough policemen with revolvers and everything, and sticks with beating and all this, that followed us. And was very strict in the beginning, very tough. And we more or less ignored them and just walked around and was nice to them, talked nicely to them. So after a while they skipped us. They didn't bother walking with us any longer. It was hot, and why should they walk with us? So then after a while we were without police. So we walked then, and of course we had a bus that took all our luggage, and where we also could drop in if we were tired, or if anyone was sick or something, could go by the bus. It was a school bus, by the way, an American school bus. So many of us used that one because it was so hot, it was so warm. We were in America for 3 weeks, and we walked then from New York and down to Washington, and we came to Washington on the Memorial Day for Martin Luther King. And the Memorial Day for Martin Luther King in 1983, I think it was a celebration of his 20 years anniversary for his death. And it was a lot of people gathering. It was a huge demonstration in Washington that day. So, of course, and there we ended the march. And I think that was the 27th of August or something like that. That is the Martin Luther King Day. So then we had worked for 3 weeks, and we had met some politicians in Capitol in Washington, but it was really a struggle to meet any politicians, and it was hard discussions and debates to meet any of the politicians in America. We didn't meet any officials, and people in general, when they saw us while we were walking along the streets, the highways actually, we had to go one on one because it was dangerous, and with the flags and all this, and people passing by that turned their thumb down to us. There were actually no positive attitude in America. So of course we had some discussions with some politicians, and that was nice, and the peace movement in America was very nice to us, but in general, people in general, nothing, and they only turned their thumb down for us. So actually we were told by press and politicians and people in Norway that in Russia, of course, we wouldn't meet anybody, only official people, not anybody. We wouldn't meet people, we wouldn't be able to speak to ordinary people, we wouldn't be able to do either that, and they would follow us, and they would look after us, and we would be stopped here and there. It didn't happen. Absolutely contrarian. And then we were told when we came to America, then there will be open democracy and open hearts and minds, and it didn't happen. So so we came home, tried to tell people about this, but it wasn't much interesting. It was not interested to hear our experiences. People, neither the official Norway, neither friends, nothing. They were not interested in hearing our experiences because it would maybe be a little negative. Maybe it will damage their thoughts, their image about East and West. So that was when I really started to be involved in the peace movement, because my experience from East Europe and Western countries, it wasn't negative, but it was I saw it was different and then contrary to what I had learned and told and people were thinking. My experience was just contrary to that. So my interest for East Europe has ever since been my interests have been great, and therefore I also started to work with East European women in the 90s when I went over more to the women's peace movement and gender policy. I was not interested to go to America anymore. I have friends in America, it's not that, but I had nothing there. I had nothing to do there. I found I could use my knowledge, my empathy, much more in East Europe. So I did that in the 90s, especially in Ukraine. I've been 7 years in a row. I have been in Ukraine and traveled all over Ukraine by train. Very interesting, lovely people. Very, very difficult country. Ukraine is divided in East and West. It's a huge country now, very, very much damaged by communism. People are very suspicious to each other. The neighbor, what will the neighbor say? What will the neighbor say? It was always the same. I cannot do it because of the neighbors. I cannot do it because they are afraid. Everyone in Ukraine are afraid because they have been educated to be afraid. Their parents were taken to Siberia. Their grandparents were taken to Siberia and imprisoned for nothing. So they're a population with scared people, and with a lot of enemy pictures to each other. And still today, there are no development there, no democracy there. They are divided in two, the ones that want to go to Europe and the ones that still want to go to Russia. They have borders with both Europe and Russia. They use Ukrainian as language in northern part, the European part, while Russia is spoken in the Russian part. So, and the culture and the behavior and the education is very different from these two, shall we say, sections in the same country. And a poor country, and it could have been so rich because it's what we call the marketplace for agriculture in Europe, because the agricultural soil is so rich and it's so vast, huge areas. But under communism, they were not allowed to have private farms. Everything was in collectives. The agriculture is damaged, and people are scared. So to reach democracy in Ukraine is a hard job. To go to the East European countries as Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, that was quite another thing. They were much more European in their culture, in their mind, much more for democracy, much more democratized. So when they became free of the Russian countries, or shall we say from Soviet, in 1991, they were prepared for democracies, and they managed quite quick to build up real democracy in Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania. But still, it's poor countries, a lot of corruption, and we feel it here in Norway now that they have gangs with criminalities. I think that is also something that's overleft from the communism. So Azerbaijan is another country. Georgia is a wonderful country, but still there are much too corruption and trouble. So it takes a long time to build up democracies. And with the wars that we are, shall we, putting on them, it takes even much longer time. So that is a little bit about the women's peace marches that we had in the 80s, and so many of us that walked these peace marches, we are still friends. We are still in the peace movement, and we are still working for non-violence and being friends and gentle to each other, not coming with wars and damaging their cultural life, their lives, their buildings, their homes. We try to we want cooperation, we want to see the whole world as one world where we are different, yes, but that enrich all of us, that we are different cultures, different ways of doing things, that's enriching all of us, and we just hope that we one day will manage.